everybody, and welcome back for more Flute Tube. Today we're going to talk about how to develop superhuman flutist lungs, which, yes, is a thing. We have to have excellent lung capacity and awareness. We need to think a lot about how we're breathing in and blowing out. Today we're going to talk less about blowing out because we really covered that topic in depth last week. So if you want to know more about that, I'll put a link to last week's episode. But today we're going to focus on breathing in and how to increase your lung capacity. And one of the best tools that we have to address these topics is also one of the greatest pieces of music, certainly one of the most influential pieces of music that was ever written, which is Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. There's so much we could talk about related to this piece. Debussy, after all, is one of my best dead friends. But there's only so much we can cover in one episode. Today we're going to focus on breathing and getting through the opening 4 measures of this solo as a breathing exercise. So if you're excited about delving into the topic of increasing your breathing capacity and your efficiency using your air, please like this video. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe, share, comment, all those things. We flutists really give ourselves the challenge of playing through this 4-measure opening solo in one breath. In an orchestral setting, it's truly not necessary to do that, and there are 3 places that are completely acceptable to breathe. I'm going to put up this opening solo because it's all in the public domain, so you can see it and see the places that are acceptable to breathe. But we're going to try to get to be able to do this in one breath. And while we're discussing this excerpt, the first thing that you need is to have a really good awareness of what it feels like to play this. It's on the surface not very difficult. Once you get into it, it becomes plenty difficult, but you can play through it if you're an advanced beginner. You definitely want to practice this excerpt both sitting and standing. Of course, if you play it in the orchestra, you will be sitting. You want to have a lot of confidence and comfort sitting and playing it. But there is a lot that we notice about our lungs. We just develop greater lung awareness if we can stand and be very free to move our entire bodies. So practice it both ways. And if you feel that it is simply impossible to get through in one breath, remember what you can change. You can change tempo. You can change your dynamic. If you play it fast enough or if you play it soft enough, you'll be able to get through it in one breath. Easy. Remember, you never have to play this very loudly. You're the only person playing on stage in hopefully a hall with good acoustics. It's nice if people in the audience feel they need to kind of sit forward on their chair and listen to that one solo flutist up on the stage. Once you've experimented with playing this and how it feels, there are 3 steps to improve how you play this excerpt, and they're great breathing tactics in general. The first step to think about when you're trying to play this in one breath is how you're breathing in. We need to get as much air in our lungs as we possibly can. I think of breathing in stages. I tell myself there are 3 stages of breathing, plus for this, a bonus. So the first stage of breathing is to breathe as low as you possibly can. Think of breathing where you don't even have lungs. Perhaps your lower back or your hips. Breathe down into your toes. We really are trying to move all of our innards down out of the way of our lungs so that our lungs can expand down. The second stage of breathing is to think of breathing around higher up in your torso, mostly where your rib cage is. So I think of expanding my rib cage both directions. We tend to focus on the fact that we have lungs in our front, but we also have lungs in our back. If you put one hand on your front and one hand on your back, and you breathe in and out and look in a mirror, you'll see that we expand both directions quite a lot. So when you're doing stage 2 of breathing and thinking of breathing around in your rib cage area, be sure that you think equally breathing into your back as into your front. Then the third stage of breathing is to breathe up high where your lungs mostly really are. They're quite high, they're around your heart. We just don't want to think about that because if we focus on breathing up high, we neglect to get them to expand down low enough. So once you've breathed low and then middle, breathe high and get that last little bit of lung capacity up here. And then as the bonus, I do something that I call ventilating, which is you've taken this nice deep breath and you've taken a few seconds to breathe. You're not going to breathe in as quickly as you can and play this. Once you've done that, you're going to blow out for approximately 30 seconds. That's a long time for your body to go without oxygen. So if you get all filled up and then you just pant a little, you're giving your body that much more oxygen to make it through. The other thing I really like about this is that once you've taken the time to go through these stages of breathing, you'll probably feel a little tight, like you've been working so hard to get all the air in and you want to release a little tension. And if you do this little ventilating, it helps you to release tension. The stages of breathing would look something like this. First down low, and then around, and then up high, and then the little ventilating, and then you play your flute. For step 2, you're going to think about how you're blowing out. And as I said, we talked about this extensively in our last episode, so I'm not going to go into it too much today. But I want to briefly revisit the idea that you want to keep your aperture between your lips, that hole between your lips, as small as possible. If it's half as big, you'll use half as much air blowing out. Don't forget how much difference that can make. And I will also repeat that I like to blow through a coffee straw before I play this excerpt because it reminds me just how small I can make my aperture and still get a beautiful sound out. So I will take a coffee straw and blow through it and remind myself that my lips are nearly closed, and then I will instantly pick up my flute and feel the same thing. Next, we're ready to move on to the third step for this excerpt especially, which is what happens to your lung capacity and your breathing and blowing when you're nervous, when you're under pressure. Luckily for us, opportunities to play this under pressure do come around because this is asked for nearly every audition. So I'm going to give you 4 things to think about that will help you to deal well with this excerpt when you're under pressure. Thing number 1, I know I've said this before, I'm repeating myself, but this is very important. You must do cardiovascular exercise. If you're used to exercising regularly, your heart rate will go up regularly. Your body will get used to the idea of functioning with an elevated heart rate. Thing number 2, what we like to have students do to get used to playing this excerpt under pressure is to run down at least 1 flight of steps, if not 4 flights, and then run back up, pick up their flutes, and try to play this in 1 breath. Don't do this until you can already play this excerpt in 1 breath in good circumstances. But once you get to that point, this is an extra test to elevate your heart rate and try to play this when circumstances are not ideal. Thing number 3, this is my own thing. I developed this because, honestly, thing number 2 is kind of not possible. Unless you are a professional athlete, people don't run down flights of steps, run back up, pick up their flutes, and instantly be able to play through this thing. But what I like to do, I feel really imitates much better what actually happens to you when you're nervous. I like to play through the excerpt, get it so that I can do it in one breath, check the second hand on my watch. It's probably going to take me about 30 seconds to get through this, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. That depends on both you and the conductor. And then once I can do it, I will go outside and go on a moderate walk. I will wear a watch that has a second hand on it, and as I'm walking, I will decide when I'm ready to take my deep 3-stage plus a bonus breath. And then I will blow out through a little hole, like a flute aperture hole, and I'll watch the second hand, and I'll continue to blow out and walk at a moderate pace until I've hit 30 seconds. It's not very comfortable, but the reason to do this is that your body gets accustomed to it. After I've done that, I will continue to walk, and when I feel a bit recovered from that experience, I'll take another deep breath, I'll check in with my second hand, I'll blow out for 30 seconds while I continue to walk. My body gets more and more accustomed to the idea that it's going to be active and at the same time feel a little bit of oxygen deprivation. The real challenge of this excerpt is not so much getting enough air to come out as having your body avoid panicking at the prolonged lack of being oxygenated. Thing number 4 to help you deal with playing this solo under pressure and still sound beautiful. Think very deliberately about when you're standing and sitting. If you have been sitting and you stand up, your heart rate will become elevated. When I'm backstage before any performance, I'm standing up. Even if I'm going to walk out on stage and then sit down, I don't want to stand up and then sit down too many different times. So if you are playing this in an orchestral setting, you will sit down. The conductor comes in and signals to the orchestra to stand while the audience is applauding. Well, think of yourself as the grand exception here, because you are. When everyone around you stands up, remain seated, because that way you won't elevate your heart rate just before you're going to play this beautiful solo and undergo oxygen and air deprivation for perhaps 30 seconds. Always think about sitting and standing very deliberately, because it will affect your heart rate and therefore your oxygen. I want to tell you a story with the hope that it will make this feel less intimidating. When I first arrived at Juilliard, I did an ensemble audition for the Juilliard orchestras, and of course this was on the audition list. So I walked into the room to do the audition, and as I expected, it was a big open room. There was a curtain at the back of the room, and behind that curtain were Julius Baker, Jeannie Baxtresser, Carol Wincenz, and Samuel Barron. And I was playing a bunch of excerpts, including this one. My big goal for this was to do it in one breath, and I didn't make it. I took the best breath, which is before the last 3 notes, but I was disappointed I did not make it. And when I went to my lesson with Carol Wincenz the next week, which I believe was only my second lesson with her, she pulled out the notes from the audition, and I was waiting for somebody to mention that I took a breath in Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. But I didn't hear anything like that. And so when Carol finished reading the notes, I said a little bit timidly, I was disappointed that I didn't make it through the Debussy in one breath. And when I brought this up, Carol's reaction was, "Oh, did you breathe? I don't think anybody noticed. I don't think it mattered." And she started to go through all the notes and said, yep, nobody said anything. The point of this story is really what people care about always with this excerpt is, how beautiful can you make it? Do you have a beautiful sound? Do you phrase? Is it musical? Are you playing in tune? If you can do those things and not take an excessive number of breaths, then in fact, it's okay to be human. We may not be superhuman after all, and we learn, in fact, that is not required.